there in the diner, the long haul, its faded neon sign barely visible, was the consistency of old grease and regret. It clung to the vinyl booths and the polyester uniform of the waitress, a woman named Shirley, who had perfected the art of looking directly through customers. For the hunter, the scent of burnt coffee and cheap fry oil was more than just irritating. It was the rank perfume of failure. It coated his tongue, metallic and bitter, tasting exactly like the last 6 weeks. He sat at the counter nursing a mug that had gone lukewarm 1 hour ago, the ceramic sticky beneath his palm. Under his fingernails, the gray, alkaline dust of a dead-end Arizona trail still lingered, a stubborn reminder of a fugitive who had slipped the noose with almost insulting ease. He was a mechanism designed for efficiency and closure, but lately the gears had been stripping. He had not missed the signs, he had missed the opportunity. A simple grift, a man who had crossed state lines with $500,000 of misappropriated funds, had turned into a humiliating ghost chase. He was supposed to bring the man back in restraints, intact, and instead, he had simply run out of road, staring at an empty, unmarked car parked 500 yards across the Mexican border. The cost of the pursuit had exceeded the retainer by a significant margin. The lack of money was a problem, heavy and immediate, pressing down on his wallet like a cinder block. But the real corrosion was deeper, settling into his self-esteem like rust on a forgotten blade. Bounty hunting was a job of reputation, built on the absolute certainty that if the hunter was tracking a target, the outcome was predetermined. Lately, the whispers drifting back across the wires were ugly. He is slowing down. He is losing the edge. The stain was visible, a professional humiliation that burned hotter than any Arizona sun. He needed a win, not just to refill the bank account, but to wipe the slate clean, to silence the doubt echoing inside the vast emptiness of the Nevada desert. He paid for the coffee, leaving a crumpled $5 bill on the counter, ignoring Shirley's sigh. The sun was beginning its brutal descent, painting the western sky in hues of orange and sickly yellow, the color of old mustard and bad intentions. He drove his old Ford pickup, a vehicle built like a heavy armored vehicle and running with the same elegant grace, the 50 feet across the asphalt to the adjacent motel parking lot. He did not bother checking in. He just needed to sit in the cab, planning the next move, mapping the next likely target, something small, cheap, and guaranteed. That was when the shadows deepened, not just from the setting sun, but from the arrival of 4 men in a single, immaculate black pickup. The truck was new, expensive, and utterly featureless. It did not have the flashy chrome or oversized tires of a rich man's toy. It was flat black, optimized for stealth and purpose. It pulled up 40 feet from his battered Ford, stopping with unnatural precision. 4 men climbed out. They were dressed in dark, functional clothing. Heavy denim, leather jackets that looked too durable, and thick-soled boots. They were not uniform, but they were homogeneous. They did not carry the sloppy threat of gangsters or the rigid tension of law enforcement. They looked like people accustomed to cold and silence, whose lives were defined by waiting. Their movements were minimal, economical, and precise, like mechanisms crafted for a singular, brutal function. The hunter, a man who lived and died by his ability to interpret minute muscle twitches, the tightening of a jaw suggesting deceit, the shift in shoulders betraying imminent violence, found nothing. He looked for the tell, the sliver of hesitation or aggression, and found only an unnerving stillness. These men radiated a power that was not trying to manifest. It simply was, an undeniable ambient force, like the fact of gravity or the relentless pull of the moon. Their eyes were the most disturbing feature. They were solid, old, the color of granite under cloud cover, sliding over him, assessing every scratch on his truck, every crease in his fatigue-stained jacket. They did not blink often. The man who stepped forward was the tallest, lean, and deceptively narrow-shouldered. He offered no handshake or introduction. He just stood 20 feet away and spoke, his voice low and carrying, cutting through the thin desert air. "We have a problem, a matter of recovery." The hunter waited. He had learned a long time ago that silence usually prompts the desperate to reveal too much. "We need someone with no ties, someone who works outside the system," the tall man continued. "Someone who finds what does not want to be found." The hunter grunted. "You found me easy enough. You left a large, obvious hole in Arizona. We know where to look for damaged goods." The insult did not sting. It was too cold, too true. "My rate is standard, plus expenses up front." The man did not flinch. He named a figure that made the hunter's throat go dry. It was a sum 10 times what he typically cleared in 1 year, enough to buy him comfortable anonymity for the next 2 decades. "The target is called the fugitive," the tall man said. The word pronounced not as a description of a criminal, but as the designation of a highly valued broken piece of property. "He is loose in the mountains of western Wyoming. He needs to be brought back, contained, or eliminated." The men did not haggle, did not ask about his methods. They only provided details about the target. They spoke of the missing individual's habits, his fears, and his routines with chilling intimacy, as if they had lived inside his skin. But then the description took a hard, unnatural turn. They spoke of unnatural strength, of impossible speed, and most disturbing of all, the mention that the fugitive had begun to lose form. The term was clinical, devoid of emotion, yet it painted a vivid picture of something shifting, something failing to maintain its structure. "He is destroying himself," the leader summarized. "We need this cleaned up before he chooses to end his path publicly. That would create complications we cannot afford." The hunter, professional to his core, pushed the strange descriptors aside. They were clearly discussing a highly dangerous individual, perhaps suffering from a severe psychotic break, wrapped in their own peculiar jargon. The money talked louder than the weirdness. He accepted the terms. The leader stepped forward and offered his hand. The handshake was brief, dry, and immensely firm. The skin was rough, like aged bark or sanded hardwood. It communicated a primal strength that had nothing to do with gym work and everything to do with lineage. When the 4 men re-entered their immaculate black truck and drove away, silently disappearing into the long, purple shadows of the highway, they left behind only the scent of their passage. It was not exhaust fumes or cologne or dry dust. It was a strange, subtle odor of raw, damp metal and rich, turned earth. A smell that did not belong to a highway parking lot or to men in jackets, or to any machine made by human hands. It was the faint, lingering scent of something deeply wild, momentarily caged. The hunter sat for a long moment, watching the headlights dwindle, the taste of cheap coffee now completely overpowered by the metallic tang of an impossible contract. He did not know what he was hunting, but he knew with chilling certainty that he was already out of his depth. He started the ford and pointed it north. The second meeting, arranged via a burner phone with a voice that was pure gravel and ice, was set for an abandoned hunting cabin deep in the western part of Wyoming, hundreds of miles and 2 days of hard driving from the diner. The hunter reached the location 2 hours early, vetting the remote cabin tucked into a dense thicket of pines overlooking a small, swift-running creek. There was no electricity, no running water, and mercifully, no other sign of human habitation for miles. The silence here was thick, a heavy blanket broken only by the low rush of the creek and the sigh of the wind moving through the needles of the ponderosa. The air smelled of cold, damp pine resin and decaying leaves, a clean smell that somehow felt heavy with forgotten secrets. He checked his gear, his mind running through contingency plans, expecting an explanation involving experimental genetics or an elite government operative gone rogue. He had dealt with disturbed individuals before. He preferred them to the kind who spoke in riddles. The leader arrived alone, walking out of the twilight shadows of the tree line as if he had simply materialized there. The tall man wore the same nondescript, heavy clothing, the only notable difference being a faint, silver-white scar, thin as a pencil line, running diagonally across his left eyebrow. He carried no visible weapon, yet the hunter felt the shift in the environment, the same dense, gravitational presence he had felt in the parking lot. They stood facing each other in the gloom of the cabin's porch. The leader wasted no time on pleasantries or small talk. He spoke immediately, his voice as level and emotionless as a financial report. "You seek answers. I will provide them once. Then we proceed on the basis of facts, not folklore." The hunter leaned against a splintered railing, crossing his arms. "I deal with facts. The facts you provided sounded like a badly written pulp novel." The leader nodded once, a minimal economical movement. "Then consider this the clarification. We are what humanity refers to in its ignorant shorthand as werewolves. But this is not magic, not possession, not a curse. It is heredity. It is biology. It is survival, refined over thousands of years." The hunter waited for the punchline, the nervous tick, the flicker of madness that should accompany such a statement. But the leader's eyes, granite in the low light, were steady. "I've chased men who claimed they were the Messiah and those who thought they were Napoleon. You're the first I've met who claims to be a talking wolf. We are predators," the leader stated, cutting through the sarcasm with cold efficiency. "We exist by adhering to the strictest discipline, a system that ensures we live alongside humanity without disruption. We age, we get sick, we make mistakes, just like humans, except for our physiology and our instincts. We maintain control." The core of their clan philosophy, delivered without a shred of theatricality, was chilling because it replaced the supernatural with the scientific, the mystical with the mundane. They were simply a divergent species, highly adapted, hiding in plain sight. "The fugitive is our problem," the leader continued, stepping closer, the metal earth smell now stronger. "He is young, powerfully built, but emotionally unstable. He broke control. He found a human connection he refuses to relinquish, and that conflict is tearing him apart. Literally." The leader produced a handful of glossy, high-resolution photographs. They were not police evidence. They were clinical, brutal shots of destroyed livestock, cows and sheep torn open with impossible savagery. But interspersed with the cattle photos were subtle, terrifying shots that implied worse. Deep gouges taken out of a farmhouse door, a blood spatter pattern on a porch that was too high to have come from a wolf, and a pair of tattered, expensive work gloves lying in a smear of coagulated blood. He is losing the boundary between his hunting instinct and his human self-control, the leader explained, his voice flat. The urge to kill is overwhelming the discipline to hide. We have tried to retrieve him. He fights us. So why don't you simply send the other 3 men you brought to the motel? The hunter asked, his own skepticism now hardening into suspicion. You're clearly effective. We cannot hunt him openly here, the leader said, his gaze sweeping over the vast, isolated landscape. Any confirmed sighting of a half-formed beast in the Wyoming high country, any evidence that our kind exists, will be the end of our centuries-old sanctuary. We value our survival more than we value one unstable member. He pointed a long, bony finger at the hunter. We need a man, a neutral factor, a human hunter who knows how to track humans, not just animals. You have the reputation for absolute discretion and the ability to close the contract without official documentation. So I'm your expendable cleanup crew. You are a professional. We require you to act as a normal bounty hunter. Do not fall prey to myths. Do not believe in the legends. Work the facts. Find the trail, corner the target, and contain him. He is either returned to us alive for rehabilitation or destroyed if he proves too far gone. Our preference is intact recovery. There was a genuine weight of guilt in the leader's demeanor, a grim necessity that bypassed simple cruelty. We do not ask for mercy, the leader said, staring directly at the hunter. We ask for justice, defined by our rules of survival. If we do not stop him, he will either destroy himself in a catastrophic public display, or he will force us to break the central rule. Never touch a human who is unaware of our existence. That is the price of our continued life. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, heavy satchel of cash, the remaining half of the immense retainer. The hunter took it, testing the weight, the paper crisp and new. The photographs of the devastation were real, and the sheer volume of money was undeniable. Whether the fugitive was a runaway experiment, a psychological wreck, or a creature of pure myth, the man was dangerous. The contract was sealed not with a handshake, but with the shared knowledge of an impossible reality, now resting heavily in the hunter's hands. He was hunting something that defied physics, but obeyed instinct. The hunter's battered Ford pickup, looking out of place and deeply suspicious, finally lumbered into the isolated valley in western Wyoming, where the last confirmed attacks had occurred. The drive had been taxing, navigating rutted logging roads and trails marked only by game paths. The air here was drier than Nevada, thin and cool, carrying the sharp, invigorating scent of high-altitude pine and the damp, sweet decay of last year's fallen leaves. The valley floor was a patchwork of scrub brush, granite outcroppings, and small, remote homesteads scattered sparsely near the river. He parked on the edge of a small, forgotten ranch property, the owner having reluctantly granted access after a few carefully placed questions about local wolf activity. The rancher had not mentioned wolves, though. He had spoken about something wrong in the silence, something that moved too fast to see clearly. The primary scene of the latest destruction was a lean-to adjacent to a large, rusted barn. A prize Hereford cow, worth more than the hunter's truck, lay in a grotesque tableau. The hunter, a former military tracker who had seen the ugly aftermath of human-animal conflicts, approached the carcass with cold professionalism. The animal was not simply killed, it was disassembled. The wounds were inconsistent with a bear, which generally uses crushing force and messy, opportunistic tearing. They were too precise for wolves, whose pack methods rely on exhaustion and hamstringing. Here the tissue had been severed with incredible force, the muscle ripped from bone cleanly, as if someone had used a meat hook and pure, violent leverage. It was not tearing, it was rending, the distinction subtle but crucial. The difference between a dull knife and a razor honed by instinct and immense strength. It was the work of something that did not know how to stop. The hunter spent the next hour working the periphery, his eyes trained on the ground with the focused intensity of a jeweler. He ignored the broad, obvious hoof prints and the tire marks left by the rancher's panicked movements. He was looking for anomalies. He found them near a sluggish stream, where the ground was wet, yielding clay. The impressions were enormous, too large for any known primate, and certainly too big for a human footprint. But the weight distribution was the impossible part. The track showed a long, almost paddle-shaped heel and a disproportionately long forefoot, suggesting a gait that was part stride, part powerful crouch. The pressure exerted on the earth was enough to press the wet clay down nearly 1 inch. Yet the stride length suggested rapid, almost airborne motion. And then there were the shoes. 10 feet away from the monstrous impression, there was a perfectly clear set of Vibram boot treads, size 12, clearly worn. And then, at the beginning of the subsequent monstrous print, the boot track abruptly ended. It looked as if the leather and rubber had simply been exploded off the foot in the moment of transformation, the resulting friction leaving a slight, strange blur on the clay. The hunter squatted, tracing the outline with a stick. He knew what he was seeing, but his rational mind tried desperately to superimpose logic. A custom-made prosthetic, a specialized piece of equipment. But the organic, raw quality of the huge track defied technology. He followed the trail where the creature entered the dense pine thicket. The ascent was steep, unforgiving terrain. The wet ground gave way to granite scree and roots. Here, the earth was scored with deep, parallel gashes, claw marks, not random gouges, but controlled scratches used for purchase during immense acceleration. He knelt, placing his own large hand next to one of the tracks. The impression was not just size, it was depth. He estimated the force required to create that kind of indentation could easily lift a small, compact car. The trajectory of movement was low to the ground, unnaturally fast, a burst of gravity-defying acceleration. At the location of the last confirmed incident, where the corner of the small tool shed had been peeled back like an aluminum can, the air was heavy with a pervasive, sickening odor. It was a cocktail of odors: drying blood, stale human sweat, the sharp tang of pure adrenaline, the smell of fear, which the hunter recognized instantly. And underneath it all, that sharp, almost electric metallic odor, like ozone after a lightning strike, mixed with something profoundly animal and musky. It was the smell of the clan, only exponentially stronger, fermented with terror and exertion. The hunter, who relied on cold, hard facts, felt the first true crack in his professional rationalism. He had worked with serial killers, with men who possessed psychopathic disregard for life, and with animals driven by simple hunger. But here, he saw a profound conflict, an immense, uncontrollable physical power grappling with and failing against intelligence. The way the shed was destroyed was not the calculated effort of a hungry predator preparing a meal. It was the violent, panicked outburst of something that was fighting its own existence. It was a fight to not kill. As the late afternoon shadows lengthened, stretching across the valley floor, the hunter felt the shift in the deep woods. The silence became unnatural, not peaceful, but heavy, expectant. The wind whistling through the crowns of the pines suddenly sounded less like natural movement and more like a whispered exchange. He had spent his life being the observer, the tracker, the hidden party. Now he felt, with the chilling certainty of instinct, that his methods, his pace, and even his thoughts were being assessed. He was not just following a trail. He was the subject of scrutiny. Somewhere just beyond the thick cover of the pine line, something knew he was there and was watching him work. The hunter realized the terrifying truth. The fugitive was not merely running from the clan. He was waiting for the hunter to catch up, using him as an unwitting part of his desperate survival plan. The predator was now being guided by the prey. The hunter chose his campsite with care, selecting a narrow, rocky defile that served as the only practical entrance and exit to the upper bowl of the valley. It was a natural choke point, offering defensible high ground and limited lines of approach. He spent the late evening setting a comprehensive perimeter. He employed military-grade seismic sensors wired to a small, silent receiver in his tent, augmenting them with traditional, nearly invisible fishing line tripwires set low to the ground, hung with tiny, tension-activated bells. He was hunting a ghost of flesh and claw, and he needed every advantage human technology and ingrained stealth could provide. Sleep was a shallow, guarded thing. His mind, usually sharp and capable of rapid decompression, remained tightly coiled. The natural night sounds of the mountains, the hoot of an owl, the snap of a dry branch, were filtered through a new lens of paranoia. Every noise was scrutinized, filed, and rejected until finally, around 3 a.m, the silence was shattered not by sound, but by its distinct, terrifying absence. His sensor unit, monitoring the main approach through the defile, suddenly triggered a reading. Not the sharp, erratic spikes associated with deer or elk, but a slow, persistent pressure wave, indicating immense weight moving with unnatural, agonizing caution. The hunter was instantly awake, his hand already wrapped around the smooth wood of his heavy hunting rifle. His heart constricted in his chest, a tight, cold knot. The sound that followed the sensor reading was minimal, a faint, dry rasp of rock against rock, like a massive block of granite being dragged across scree with deliberate care. He waited, allowing his eyes to adjust to the meager light filtering down from the half-moon hidden behind thin cloud cover. It took agonizing minutes, but then, framed by the jagged silhouette of the rocky gorge, he saw the fugitive. It was not the magnificent, powerful wolf of lore. It was a grotesque, terrifying halfway point. The body was elongated, the spine bowed, supported by limbs that were impossibly long and thick. The elbows and knees jointed in the wrong direction, giving the creature a spring-loaded, perpetually crouched look. Patches of rough, black and silver hair sprouted haphazardly across the stretched skin, which was already tearing in places due to the rapid, painful transformation. Its head was too large, the snout still receding but stretched tight, baring teeth that were too long and too sharp. It was a nightmare of biological transition. But the eyes were pure human. They were wide open, full of a raw, unadulterated terror that dwarfed the size of the beast. They were not focused on the hunter as prey, but on the world around them, frantic, lost, and utterly horrified by the shape they inhabited. The hunter raised his rifle, sighting in on the creature's center mass. He had no doubt he could put 3 rounds into it before it moved 10 feet, but the sight of those human eyes made him hesitate. The fugitive did not charge. It did not growl. It stood 30 feet away, swaying slightly, consumed by a visible tremor, like a man suffering from hypothermia. Then a sound emerged from the misshapen throat. It began as a fractured, rattling wheeze, evolving rapidly into a broken, drawn-out sound that was halfway between a sob and a choked animal cry. It was the sound of something internal breaking. And then, through the sheer effort of will overriding monstrous anatomy, it forced out what sounded unmistakably like a broken, ragged word. "Go," it whispered, the sound thick with phlegm and pain. "Go. Away." The plea, wrung from the throat of a creature that could rip him apart in seconds, was paralyzing. It was not a threat. It was a desperate warning. Before the hunter could process the impossible spoken word, the fugitive reacted to some internal trigger. A sudden flash of pain or an approaching sound the hunter couldn't hear. It pivoted with shocking speed, scrambling up the sheer rock face of the gorge wall. The claws dug deep, leaving white scrapes on the dark granite. In 3 seconds it was gone, swallowed by the shadow and the pines high above. The hunter immediately moved to the location where the fugitive had stood. The ground was marked by the massive, clear impressions of the claws where it had leaped. On a nearby outcropping of stone, shining darkly in the faint moonlight, was fresh blood. But next to the blood, snagged on a sharp edge of quartz, was a small, torn piece of fabric. It was thin, cheap cotton, the pale gray of basic men's underwear. The material was not worn or cut. It was ripped violently, from the inside out, shredded by the explosive growth of the tissue beneath. The hunter stood frozen, clutching the soiled piece of cotton. The professional detachment he had maintained since taking the contract evaporated. The thing he was hunting was not an animal, and the clan's term, unstable predator, did not seem to cover it. The eyes were the key. There had been no predatory rage, no hunting instinct, only the abject, desperate fear of the pursued. It was terrified not of the hunter, but of the internal monster it was becoming. The fugitive was in a state of self-preservation, fighting to keep the remnants of his humanity intact, even if it meant starving or collapsing from exhaustion. A cold, sick certainty began to settle in the hunter's stomach. He was paid an impossible sum to capture or eliminate a dangerous escapee. But based on the evidence, the sound of pain, the human plea, the tearing cotton, he was not hunting a killer. He was hunting a desperate prisoner on the verge of total, irreversible collapse. He felt the cold, familiar touch of a double cross. The clan had paid him to clean up a political or biological failure, cloaked in the language of community protection. He had just been initiated into a game where the lines of good and evil were dissolving into pure, ancient instinct. The dynamic shifted drastically after the encounter at the gorge. The hunter was no longer strictly the pursuer, he was being led. The fugitive, demonstrating an uncanny and terrifying intelligence, began to dictate the terms of their engagement. He would leave subtle, almost invisible markers, a pine branch carefully angled against a specific granite boulder, or a scratch on the bark of a mature spruce that no bear would make. And accompanying these signals was that faint, bitter odor of animal musk and fear, a scent marker telling the hunter, "Follow." The hunter spent the entire next day following the deliberate, cautious trail, feeling the unsettling truth of his new role as a decoy. He kept his rifle close, but he did not raise it. He reached the designated meeting spot, a high, secluded meadow hidden above the timberline, just as the thin mountain light began to fail. The fugitive was already there, sitting with his back pressed hard against the trunk of a massive subalpine fir. He was entirely in human form now, but the change had not brought relief. He was a shell of a man. His skin was unnaturally pale, stretched tight over the sharp angles of his jaw, and he trembled constantly, a high-frequency vibration that ran through his whole body. His hands shook so violently he kept them clenched into fists. His eyes, the same wide, terrified eyes from the night before, were bruised purple with exhaustion and looked too large for his skull. He spoke quickly, a rushed, breathless torrent of words, like a man confessing before facing a firing squad. "They didn't tell you everything, the fugitive." His human name was unnecessary now, subsumed by the horror. Said, his voice a low, dry rasp. "They told you I was unstable, that I was a threat to the community. That's true, but not the whole truth." The hunter said nothing, merely settling on a rock 50 feet away, allowing the silence to be broken only by the man's desperate monologue. The story unfolded not as a tale of genetic defect, but of heartbreaking human weakness. "I broke the central tenet, the rule that keeps us hidden," the fugitive whispered. "I didn't want to be the beast. I found her. A girl. In the town 80 miles east. She's just human. I wanted to stay human for her. I wanted to stop the cycle." He leaned his head back against the rough bark, struggling to breathe. The clan. They don't care about the risk to the herd. They care about control. They want me back not to heal me, but to sever the connection. They will isolate me, condition me, force me to forget her. And if I fight that, they will break me completely, eliminate me, because a broken alpha is a weakness they cannot permit. The true horror of the clan's purpose was revealed. Their mission was not to protect humanity from a monster, but to purge one of their own of the most deeply humanizing instinct, love, in order to preserve their ancient, cold structure. The fugitive described the transition process, confirming the hunter's observations. It was not a sleek, powerful shift. It was agony. "When I lose the border, it's like my bones are being powdered and reassembled with a sledgehammer. The instinct is a tsunami, a massive, screaming voice telling me to hunt, to tear, to feed." He lifted his trembling hands, flexing them. "The reason I don't finish the job, the reason the livestock are torn and the people who did not survive the night were left abruptly, is her. Every time the instinct takes over, her face comes into my mind. It's the only thing that pulls me back. It's the only wall between the fugitive and pure monster. I fight to not let the instinct win, and that fight is ripping me apart from the inside." The hunter felt the cold, hard weight of two opposing narratives. The clan offered order, safety, and immense financial reward. The fugitive offered vulnerability, absolute chaos, and the raw, pleading desperation of a human being buried under a ton of unwanted muscle and teeth. The clan lied by omission, presenting a biological crisis as a moral imperative. The fugitive lied by presenting his personal crisis as a fight for all humanity. But the hunter was a man of facts, and the facts spoke loudest through the blood left on the rocks and the victims left breathing in the wake of the attacks. The fugitive fought to not be a killer. "I need help," the fugitive finally said, his voice dropping almost to inaudible levels. "I am not asking you to save me. I am asking you to be the judge. You are an outside element. I will cooperate. I will help you track them, find their weaknesses. Just don't give me back to them. If they take me, they will either destroy what's left of my mind, or they will choose to end my path permanently. And I don't want to die knowing I surrendered her memory." The hunter considered the request, the enormous paycheck suddenly tasting like ash and betrayal. He looked at the wreckage of the man before him. The immense ancient power that ran through the clan was terrifying, but the fragile, clinging humanity of the fugitive was deeply unsettling. The contract was tainted. He would not be working for the clan any longer, but he would not be working for the fugitive either. He would be working for the truth, wherever it led. "I will watch them," the hunter said finally, his voice flat. "I will look at what they do when they think no one is watching. If your claims prove true, the contract is void. If you are lying, I still have a job to do." The fugitive nodded, a flicker of something like gratitude in his ruined eyes. The new plan was set. The hunter would now turn his tracking skills not on his quarry, but on his employers. The metallic smell of the clan was stronger than ever, but now the hunter knew it for what it was. The cold, dry scent of absolute power maintaining its perfect camouflage. The hunter pulled his operations back, creating a wide, unseen perimeter around the rumored location of the clan's operational center. It was not a hidden cave or a mountaintop fortress. It was a sprawling, neatly maintained farmhouse complex, situated at the head of a remote agricultural valley. It looked like the kind of place owned by wealthy, conservative farmers. A cluster of sturdy outbuildings, a large main house, and vast fields of hay and alfalfa. It was ringed by robust, if slightly weathered, chain-link fencing and a heavy electronically secured front gate. This was the Quadrant, the home base of the ancient hidden species. For the first 2 days, the clan lived out an utterly mundane, pastoral existence. During the daylight hours, the facade was perfect. The hunter watched through high-powered optics from a ridge 2 miles away. The men were active, pragmatic, and entirely human in their behavior. They repaired a rusted tractor, performed carpentry work on a new shed, and drove an older, unmarked sedan into the nearest unnamed town for supplies. Fertilizer, feed, lumber. They were model neighbors, restrained and polite, the kind of folks who would lend you a tool and return it perfectly clean. The scent of their daily lives, carried on the breeze, was the comforting, predictable smell of diesel fuel, sawdust, and clean, freshly laundered cotton. But when the sun finally dipped, casting long, bruised purple shadows across the valley, the facade dissolved. The hunter watched as the men gathered behind the main barn in a large open yard shielded from the view of the remote county road. There were no rituals, no mystical summoning. What followed was a disciplined, brutal training exercise. They paired off, sparring in silence. They did not use boxing gloves or protective pads. The hunter watched through the crosshairs of his scope as they fought with bone-jarring impact, short, sharp movements that were devastatingly effective. They were honing their speed, their reaction time, and the pure kinetic force of their physical forms. The air was filled with the rhythmic sound of heavy impact, the sickening crack of knuckles against ribs, the low thud of a body slamming into packed earth, and the short, sharp grunts of exertion. The sound was horrifyingly primal, a language spoken only through contact and pain. The leader, the tall man with the scar, was the fixed point of this brutality. His authority was not demonstrated through shouting or threats. It was simply radiated, an undeniable aura of dominance. He moved slowly at first, overseeing the smaller skirmishes, but when he engaged, his speed was terrifying. He did not seem to shift mass. He simply moved from point A to point B instantly, neutralizing his opponent with a single, precisely delivered blow to a nerve cluster or joint. It was the purest form of animal hierarchy, imposed with cold discipline onto a modern human structure. They were not men pretending to be predators. They were predators wearing human skin like a well-tailored suit. The hunter, disturbed but still professionally detached, used his downtime to verify the clan's original claims regarding the fugitive's victims. Using burner lines and old contacts within various state police departments, a dangerous move but necessary, he managed to pull the redacted reports regarding the 3 individuals who had not survived the attacks. The reports were messy, classified internally as fatal encounters with an unknown large animal. The common threads were chilling, massive, crushing trauma, but always combined with the characteristic rending wounds. Crucially, every single report contained an unusual note from the forensic expert. The attack was categorized as severely disproportionate to known predator behavior, and specifically that the assault appeared to have been abruptly terminated mid-act. There was no consumption of the victims, and the carnage stopped suddenly without tactical reason. The hunter put the pieces together. If the fugitive had intended to kill, the victims would have been reduced to mere fragments. He was a creature capable of terrifying elimination, yet he had fled the scene, leaving the evidence of his crime raw and incomplete. He had not survived the night because the beast had won. They had not survived because the man inside the beast had fought to a standstill and retreated, horrified by his own actions. The attacks were not hunting expeditions. They were internal battles that had violently spilled over into the human world. The hunter felt a dizzying sensation, as if the ground were shifting beneath him. He had been hired to track a psychotic killer. He realized he had been hired by a secretive, highly structured organization to eliminate a competing biological threat. A member who, due to his capacity for human love and his fight against his own instincts, threatened the smooth operation of the pack's ancient secrecy. The immense sum of money he was paid was not for his discretion. It was for his ability to kill the target without generating the messy, visible evidence that the clan themselves could not afford to leave behind. It was not a bounty hunt. It was a moral dilemma wrapped in muscle and bone. The hunter realized he was not an operative. He was a hired assassin, paid to carry out a cold evolutionary necessity. The tension had grown so dense it felt like a low-grade electrical field humming just above the hunter's skin. He was watching the watchers, and the effort was wearing him down, sanding away the last edges of his professional composure. He had spent 3 nights without meaningful sleep, fueled only by bad coffee and the mounting dread of his predicament. The clan knew. They had not seen him, but they sensed he was no longer operating with the single-minded focus of a simple contractor. They could sense his hesitation, his shifting loyalty, the way a pack can sense a change in the wind direction before the first leaf turns. The phone, the burner he had used for the initial contact, chimed, a sharp, intrusive sound in the wilderness quiet. It was the leader. The leader's voice, usually a flat monotone, now possessed a subtle, grinding rasp like steel wool on granite. He did not threaten, he merely stated fact. Your location is known. Your proximity is understood. The window for containment is closing. We require immediate action. Deliver the fugitive to the agreed coordinates within 12 hours. There was no negotiation, only command. The hunter knew the message was less about the fugitive's danger and more about eliminating the hunter as a complication. They were tightening the screws, demanding compliance or elimination. The hunter, however, was already feeling a violent physical reaction to the immense pressure. He was experiencing feverish heat, not the clammy sweat of illness, but a deep churning warmth that felt like a furnace stoked beneath his ribs. It was anxiety manifesting as a biological symptom. The fight-or-flight response pushed past exhaustion. He was caught between two immense, powerful currents, and any wrong move now would tear him to pieces. The fugitive confirmed the escalating crisis. He staggered into the makeshift rendezvous point later that afternoon, unable to maintain the ruse of health. He barely held human shape. His movements were jerky, his skin slick with sweat and the residue of the metallic musk. "It's getting faster," he gasped, clutching at his temples. "The changes. I can't sleep. The dreams. They're full of running and the smell of blood. I lose hours now, and I wake up covered in dirt, miles away. I'm going to lose it, Hunter. Soon. The beast is ready to take the reins completely." The hunter stared at the trembling man. The path ahead was agonizingly clear. If he delivered the fugitive, he became an accessory to a cold-blooded elimination, no matter how they phrased it. He would be rich, but morally bankrupt and haunted forever by the fugitive's human eyes. If he simply walked away, the clan would eliminate the fugitive themselves, and then they would certainly turn their attention to the loose end, the hunter who knew too much. He made the only choice that maintained his professional integrity and his moral compass. He would not pick a side. He would create a third option. He would force both parties into a zero-sum conflict where the leverage, intelligence, strategy, and firepower belonged to the man who was still entirely human. He began preparing the trap. He drew upon his deepest reserves of knowledge, tracking tactics learned in war zones and surveillance techniques adapted for absolute stealth. He needed an environment where the immense, untamed strength of the creatures would be mitigated, and where human ingenuity could dominate. He found the perfect stage 6 miles from the clan's compound, a massive, abandoned mountain ore processing station. It was a brutalist labyrinth of decaying concrete silos, rusting steel catwalks, and narrow, dark corridors. The ground was uneven, littered with rebar and loose shale. In the open wilderness, the fugitive and the clan had absolute advantage. In a tightly controlled, crumbling, man-made environment, the advantage shifted to the intellect that understood angles, sight lines, and cover. To draw them both in, he needed bait. He drove back to the perimeter where he had last met the fugitive and retrieved a small, significant object the man had been carrying. A faded photograph of the human girl he loved. He wrapped it in a small cloth and placed it prominently on a granite boulder easily visible from the sky. Knowing the clan used drones or highly skilled spotters, the placement served as a clear message. I have the target's most valued possession. I know where he is going. Finally, he sent the clan a single coded message on the burner phone. The global positioning system coordinates of the abandoned station, followed by the word retrieval. The hunter backed away from the gorge, leaving the stage set. The silence was now gone, replaced by the ringing certainty of inevitable violence. He had invited two primal forces to an arena, where he, the human intermediary, held all the architectural advantage. He felt the cold pressure recede, replaced by the thin, sharp focus of a man preparing for the fight of his life. He was no longer just hunting. He was preparing to act as a catalyst for a change in the biological order. The abandoned mining station sat high on the mountainside, a crumbling monument to human industry and eventual neglect. As dusk bled across the sky, painting the broken skyline in colors of sickly gray and bruised violet, the station became the perfect theater for impending horror. The wind whistled mournfully through the ruptured corrugated iron walls, creating a symphony of creaks and groans that masked other, subtler sounds. The air was thick with the scent of pulverized rock, machine oil, and cold, damp concrete. The hunter waited inside the main processing plant, positioned on the highest usable platform, a rusted metal perch 20 feet above the main floor. His rifle was stabilized, and he had clear sight lines down the primary access ramps and across the wide, dusty yard. The clan arrived first. They did not use the main dirt road. They came through the timber line, appearing at the edge of the clearing with alarming speed and silence. All 4 of the original men were present, including the leader. They were not yet fully transformed, but their gait was different. Low, spring-loaded, their eyes wide and constantly scanning. They moved with a chilling, synchronized efficiency, communicating without gesture or sound. The hunter felt their arrival as a physical punch of air, preceded by the sharp, intense smell of wet animal fur and that distinct metallic ozone odor, now overwhelming. They spread out, taking up tactical positions, moving like highly trained counter-terrorism operatives, only faster and quieter. Minutes later, the fugitive appeared from the opposite direction, scrambling up the steep, rubble-choked slope behind the main engine house. He was further gone than before. The transformation was nearly complete. His body was covered in thick, coarse hair, his face a distorted mask of snout and teeth. He moved entirely on all 4s, a massive, powerful shape in the dim light. His eyes, though still burning with a vestige of human consciousness, were wild and darting, consumed by adrenaline and rage. He was trapped, cornered, and entirely governed by instinct. The hunter let them settle into their positions, allowing the tension to coil tight enough to snap. Then he spoke, his voice projected through a small, powerful, battery-operated bullhorn echoing harshly off the concrete walls. "Stop, all of you. Contract negotiations are reopened." The 4 members of the clan instantly froze, their heads snapping up toward the source of the sound. The fugitive hesitated, panting heavily, his focus momentarily pulled from the immediate threat of his former allies. The hunter lowered the horn slightly. "The contract is void. The facts don't support your narrative. You said he was a danger to the herd. That's true. But you lied about why. You lied about his victims. He left them breathing. He ran away from the kill. This isn't about protecting the secret. This is a containment operation to maintain your internal structure. He laid out his evidence. The inconsistencies in the police reports, the half-finished carnage, the shredded clothes left behind, the fugitive's desperate attempts to maintain control. The leader stood utterly still below, his facial expression masked by shadow, but his body language was rigid with furious control. "You're out of your depth, human." The leader's voice finally came, low and vibrating with contained rage. "Drop the rifle and walk away. You can still collect your fee." "I'm out of my depth, yes," the hunter agreed, his voice calm. "But I have the high ground and the angle. And I understand something you clearly forgot. Physics. Now talk. You want to eliminate a threat to your secrecy or a threat to your throne?" The silence that followed was heavy, pregnant with a primordial threat. The fugitive began to whimper, the sound caught between human terror and animal impatience. Under the immense pressure of a weapon leveled at his head and the imminent collapse of his control, the leader finally yielded the terrifying truth, his words spitting out, laced with a venom of shame and ancient pride. "He became stronger than I am," the leader hissed, the sound barely human. "Our rules are not morality. They are survival structure. When one member becomes physically superior, particularly one who is emotionally compromised and dangerously unstable, it triggers the hierarchy challenge. He could take the pack. If he, as an unstable, compromised being, manages to usurp my place, he will destroy us all. He will lose control entirely and expose us. This isn't a hunt, you fool. It's the preventative elimination of a coup." The ultimate stark horror was the realization that this was not a moral battle, a mythical struggle between good and evil, or even a matter of discipline. It was purely biological, a struggle for dominance, cloaked in the necessary secrecy required for their survival. The immense ancient power the clan possessed was being utilized to suppress a natural violent challenge to the alpha male. The hunter felt a dizzying clarity. He was not a hero or an assassin. He was merely a tool, the human leverage brought in to execute an internal, brutal, and entirely natural selection process. The leader had tried to eliminate his rival using a neutral, expendable agent. But the hunter, by forcing the truth out, had just ignited the conflict prematurely. He had shattered the thin veneer of order, exposing the raw, bloody nature of the competition beneath. The fugitive recognized the shift, the sound of the confession acting as a trigger. He uttered a high-pitched, terrifying roar and threw himself forward toward the stationary clan members, his rage no longer controlled by fear. The hunt was over. The primal selection process had begun. The stillness of the abandoned station was violently ripped apart. The fugitive's charge was met instantly by the clan. In the twilight, the 4 men below the hunter's platform dissolved into motion, shifting shape in a sickening display of biological acceleration. Clothing shredded, bones cracked and elongated, and the air was filled with a horrific symphony of tearing fabric and visceral growth. They met the fugitive's attack not as men, but as 4 engines of muscle and teeth, transformed into the terrifying half-formed creatures that maximized speed and ferocity. The ensuing melee was a chaos of shadow, sound, and overwhelming musky stench. Teeth snapped, claws raked across concrete, and the short, explosive barks and growls echoed off the metal silos. The hunter, however, remained cold, focused, and precise. He was a human mind observing animal combat. He had to act fast, choosing his targets with absolute certainty. He knew that shooting the main body mass or the head would be useless against their power. He needed to cripple the movement. He chose his first shot, aiming low, relying on his deep understanding of anatomy. The target was the largest of the clan members, a heavy-set man who had pinned the fugitive against a rusting piece of machinery. The hunter squeezed the trigger, the massive report of the rifle deafening in the enclosed space. The round found its mark, the knee joint. The creature roared, a sound of surprise more than pain, and its entire lower leg collapsed, the power draining out of it as it stumbled back, its momentum destroyed. The hunter shifted focus, covering the fugitive who, despite his immense strength, was struggling to focus his attack. He was fighting with the wild, desperate energy of a cornered animal, while the clan fought with disciplined pack coordination. The leader, realizing the hunter was actively disrupting their advantage, turned his focus toward the platform. He began scrambling up the support struts, his movements terrifyingly fluid. The hunter fired again. This time, the target was the clan leader, the architect of the contract. The shot was aimed at the critical weakness, the fused human hips. The leader was hit mid-climb, the heavy slug smashing into his pelvic girdle. He did not cry out in agony. The only sound was a sharp exhalation of fury. His powerful grip failed, and he crashed down onto the concrete 20 feet below, landing with a sickening, heavy thud. The leader attempted to rise, dragging his massive, newly formed lower body across the ground. His strength was already leaching away, replaced by the grim reality of a mortal wound. He lifted his head, fixing his granite eyes on the hunter, the rage incandescent. "You think you saved him?" the leader hissed, the voice choked with blood and rage. "You doom us all. He is uncontrollable. Without my discipline, he will become pure chaos. You won't survive this either." The warning was primal, delivered with a desperate, chilling certainty. With the alpha severely wounded and 2 other clan members momentarily stunned by the intervention, the tide turned. The fugitive, seeing the chance, exploded with renewed, desperate energy. He lunged at the remaining healthy clan members, his attacks becoming purely instinctual, driven by the adrenaline of the imminent takeover. He moved with a speed and savagery that eclipsed the others. There was no hesitation now, only the brutal, final necessity of eliminating competition. The remaining members of the clan met their fate quickly, destroyed in a flurry of claw and snapping bone. The station filled with the sharp, coppery smell of arterial blood and the terrible final sounds of a biological process pushed to its ultimate conclusion. The fugitive stood over the fallen, his huge chest heaving, his monstrous form dominating the ruin. He was the only one left standing, the accidental alpha, coated in the blood of his kin. There was no triumph in the scene, only a wild, uncontrolled surge of kinetic energy, raw power, and the terrifying exhaustion of the victorious animal. The hunter looked down the sight of his rifle at the new apex predator. The job was technically incomplete. He had failed to return the fugitive. He had failed to eliminate him. He had destroyed the leader, thereby ensuring the fugitive's survival and ascendancy. The clan was now in chaos, ruled by the most unstable of their members. The professional choice demanded he eliminate the new alpha now, while he was exhausted and momentarily distracted by his victory. That would honor the contract's spirit of preventing chaos and would ensure the end of the threat. But the hunter looked at the wreckage, the human lives, the animal rules, the financial betrayal, and made a different choice. A radical, professional heresy. He stepped back from the platform, letting the heavy rifle clatter against the rusted metal floor. He stripped off his gear, leaving the sensors, the horn, and the empty shell casings exactly where they lay. He looked down one last time at the new, terrified ruler of the pack, surrounded by the remnants of the old guard. He turned and walked away, choosing neither to judge nor to intervene further. He abandoned the chaos, leaving the creatures to their ancient bloody right to choose their own hierarchy. He was no longer the operative. He was merely the witness to an eternal non-human justice, and he wanted no part of the fallout. The hunter did not take the time to retrieve his truck. He walked away from the mountain station, moving on foot, pushing himself hard through the rough timber and down the steep incline toward the nearest road 6 miles away. The sky was just beginning to lighten, smeared with the exhausted colors of a coming, overcast day. He did not look back. He needed to put distance between himself and the industrial ruin, a place where the rules of man had been torn to shreds by the mandates of the wild. The air no longer smelled of pine and damp earth. It was saturated with the heavy, sweet, and metallic stench of warm, thick blood and the acrid, biting scent of gun smoke clinging to the overheated barrel of the discarded rifle. He carried the residual odor with him, a ghost on his clothing. His body ached in ways that a simple trek should not warrant. He was covered in bruises, not from bullets or human fists, but from the kinetic shock waves of the violence he had witnessed, the sheer brute energy radiating from the fighting creatures. His hands were burned raw from the repeated rapid firing of the heavy rifle, and a searing pain cut through his left side from where he had been forced to dive off the platform to avoid the leader's last desperate lunge. These were not the wounds of a bounty hunter's struggle. They were the invisible scars of proximity to forces that transcended human scale. His mind, once a fortress of logical deduction and calculated risk assessment, felt shattered. His entire career had been built on the premise that everything had a rational explanation: money, greed, psychosis, or power. He had just witnessed reality warp, confirming the existence of an ancient, predatory biology that lived seamlessly adjacent to the mundane world. The sheer terrifying fact of it, the sudden shift of flesh and bone, the non-human intelligence, had cracked his rationalism wide open. He reached a lonely paved county road by mid-morning and managed to hitch a ride with a bewildered long-haul trucker who smelled mercifully of diesel and tobacco. By late afternoon, the hunter was over 300 miles away, checking into a crumbling, forgettable motel on the edge of a forgettable town in the next state over. The ritual of cleansing was necessary but futile. He spent 1 hour in the small, tiled bathroom scrubbing his skin until it was pink and raw, trying to wash away the sticky, musky smell. He cleaned his sidearm meticulously, wiping away the faint smears of congealed fur and fleshy remnants that adhered to the slide and frame. As he worked, he noticed that the metallic, ozone smell was not leaving his system. It seemed to have migrated under his skin, a constant, sharp reminder clinging to the lining of his sinuses. It was his new, permanent perfume, the smell of the void between worlds. He had walked away from the biggest payday of his life. The contract was not only unfulfilled, but actively sabotaged. He was short thousands in expenses and long on a massive target on his back, having eliminated the established alpha and effectively elevated the unpredictable rival. But he had gained something far more valuable than the money: knowledge. A terrible, irrefutable knowledge that the world he thought he understood, the world of borders, laws, and physics, was merely the top layer of a much deeper, more terrifying ecological structure. He had not survived by being smarter or stronger, but by exploiting the rules of a primal society. He sat on the edge of the cheap, thin mattress, the television hissing static in the corner. He did not contact his old network. He did not report his location. He did not even try to track the fate of the abandoned station. He knew the clan would have cleaned it up with frightening efficiency. The bodies buried, the blood washed away, the illusion of silence restored. He was waiting. They would come for him. The question was only when and in what form they would arrive. He was an anomaly now, a human who knew the code, and anomalies are rarely permitted to continue existing without purpose. A week passed in a blur of restless nights and hyper-vigilant days. The hunter stayed put in the nameless motel, his existence reduced to the simple, stark cycle of cleaning his weapon, eating poor food, and monitoring the periphery. He waited for the news report, the inevitable discovery of a massive, bloody incident in the Wyoming mountains. But the media remained silent. The clan, as anticipated, had eliminated the evidence with a speed and professionalism that bordered on the supernatural. The blood was gone, the torn bodies buried, and the silence was once again absolute. The greatest confirmation of the new order came indirectly. The hunter used a distant, deeply veiled contact in the law enforcement information technology sector to check on the status of the human girl the fugitive loved, the anchor that tethered the new alpha to sanity. The information came back clean. She was alive in her home, living her ordinary life, entirely unaware of the biological coup she had catalyzed. This fact brought the hunter a strange, cold sense of moral victory. He had professionally failed the contract, lost the immense fee, and created immense danger for himself. Yet he had catalyzed a situation where the most deeply humanizing factor had been preserved. The new alpha, despite his terrifying, unstable power, had honored his desperate human promise. Nature, forced by human intervention, had installed a leader who valued an external, non-pack connection. As the hunter reflected, the clan ceased to be a terrifying myth in his mind, and settled into the uncomfortable reality of being merely a sophisticated, highly successful species. They were not monsters out of a fairy tale. They were just very old, very strong predators forced to live under a severe, self-imposed code of secrecy to ensure their long-term survival. His intervention had not been an act of heroism, but a necessary surgical event that allowed the biological structure to right itself, however painfully. The sensory memory of the night was indelible. Every time the hunter stepped outside, his eyes swept the tree line, searching for the telltale sign of a broken branch or a displaced stone. He was now attuned to the impossible. He saw the world differently, noting shadows that were too dense, sounds that were too clean, and scratches on the sides of trees that were too deep to be natural abrasion. The universe had gained a hidden dimension, and he, against his will, had been given the keys to perception. 2 weeks after leaving the mountain station, the anonymity of his motel room was broken. A heavy, thick envelope arrived via registered courier. No return address, no identifying marks on the outer packaging. The paper felt like expensive cotton rag. It was sealed with a drop of crimson wax bearing a faint, rough intaglio, the same ancient, precise sigil the hunter had seen imprinted on the ring worn by one of the subordinate clan members. When the hunter opened the envelope, the sharp, metallic smell of wet earth and ozone wafted out, faint but unmistakable. It was the scent of recognition, the mark of the pack. Inside, there was a stack of currency that was neatly bound and significantly thicker than the initial agreed-upon fee. It was the full original amount plus a substantial bonus. Enough money to disappear forever and live extremely well. Beneath the money was a single piece of heavy vellum, inscribed with a precise calligraphic hand, yet conveying a sense of rigid, unyielding force. The note was short, brutal, and to the point. The hunter held the thick vellum, tracing the precise, firm lines of the handwriting. The metallic scent of the ink and the paper itself was a palpable reassurance of the sender's identity. The message was without preamble or flourish, a cold declaration of fact. If further work is required, you will be contacted. We respect the individual who chooses their own path. You did not eliminate. You did not surrender. You proved honest to the instinct. The final sentence resonated with a chilling finality. They had judged his actions and found them suitable. He was not deemed a threat to be purged, but an asset to be retained. By refusing to comply with the Alpha's lie and by forcing the situation to its biological, inevitable conclusion, he had demonstrated an understanding of their deep-seated necessity that transcended mere human morality. He was no longer just a bounty hunter. He had become a recognized intermediary, a trusted human factor within the operations of a hidden ancient structure. He was the bridge between human law and pack necessity. His reputation, the one he thought was irrevocably destroyed, had been transformed. He was now known not as the man who failed the Arizona Trail, but as the man who navigated the internal politics of apex predators. The payment was not just compensation, it was a retainer, a blood price ensuring his continued availability. His internal transformation was complete. The hunter had always been a rationalist, viewing the world as a complex machine governed by physics and psychology. Now his rational framework had expanded, contorted to absorb the undeniable reality of an unseen, primordial world pulsing beneath the surface of everyday life. He had accepted that his life was now permanently tethered to the smell of ozone and the subtle echoes of sounds that should not exist. The crippling loneliness that had been his constant companion for decades had suddenly, terrifyingly evaporated. He was no longer alone. He felt a delicate, unnerving sense of observation, not hostile surveillance but protective presence. He was guarded. He was a piece on their board now, valuable enough to warrant subtle protection. He had become, through no conscious decision of his own, part of their extended world. A small slip of paper had been tucked beneath the payment. It contained a satellite phone number and a sparse clinical set of details regarding a new problem. Another unstable. A runaway. but this time originating from a territory far to the east, miles from the clan's current domain. The new target was described only by a physical descriptor and a geographical quadrant. The implication was clear. His new role was to handle threats to the system wherever they arose, functioning as an outside cleaner for the hidden world. The hunter counted the thick stack of bills, then carefully folded the money and tucked it away. He picked up his rifle, now clean and functional, and began the ritual of preparation, checking the rounds, packing his gear, securing his pickup. He was not hunting a fugitive anymore. He was hunting imbalance, instability, and the inevitable fallout of a world trying to maintain its strict, necessary isolation. He looked into the cracked mirror above the sink. The man reflected there had shadows beneath his eyes, but his gaze was sharp, filled with a terrible, informed certainty. He was their man. The mediator in the twilight, balancing the desperate needs of humanity against the merciless laws of the pack. He knew, with the cold clarity of intuition, that this new path was eternal and dangerous. He was working for the shadow world now, and somewhere, in the deep places of the system, someone or something else, something that intensely disliked those who shared the night with creatures of fang and claw, was already beginning to track the hunter.